Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. This is episode 106. I am thrilled to announce that my family, as of today, Thursday, is out of isolation. So thank God we have gotten over COVID. Actually, my daughter was the only one who got it. The rest of us didn't even catch it from her. And we're all healthy, and public health has let us out of the house. Praise the Lord. Thrilled to share another episode of the podcast with you today. My guest is Ian Morgan Cron. Ian is one of the top Christian Enneagram teachers. If you don't otherwise know him, he's a best-selling author, a psychotherapist, and he hosts the Typology podcast. Typology is massive and I know has been really helpful to many, many people in their journey of healing and hope. Ian is the author of the book, The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey of Self-Discovery, and it's one of the books that I highly recommend to people. So Ian and I discussed original goodness, the mystery of God in our lives, the unconscious motivations of the Enneagram types. We talked especially about the Enneagram types under stress, because that's real to me right now. We talked about dying to this false self, the ego, as well as a little bit on Tibetan Buddhism. So lots of fun stuff in here for you today. And of course, this is available in transcribed text. So head over to jonathanpuddle.com/podcast, click on the link for this show, and you'll be able to read through the text. If you'd rather do that than listen. Here we go. I am thrilled to welcome Ian Morgan Cron to the show this week. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
You've got this book, The Road Back to You, and in my own writing and my own journeying, I have definitely had to come around to maybe healing is actually discovering the goodness and the truth of our humanity. I was raised in a tradition that was quite interested in escaping it, or at least that was what happened to me, whether that was explicitly taught or not. The Enneagram has been really instrumental for me in helping me kind of figure out the difference between the good parts of me and the parts that have yet to become good, if I could put it that way. I still run into a lot of people who say, really, is it about us? Are we journeying back to us? I've heard people say, when I've recommended your book to people, The Road Back to You, shouldn't that be like the road towards Jesus? Where does that, how do you unpack that?
The irony is that you think about John Calvin, in the opening paragraph of the Institutes writes, "Without knowledge of self, there is no knowledge of God." Augustine writes, "Lord, may I know myself that I may know thee." There is an inextricable link between self-knowledge and knowledge of God. I don't entirely understand that mystery. But if you think about it, if we are made in the image of God, then we are a primary source for understanding who the divine is, right? And I would also say that, and I'll be blunt, when I meet people sometimes who say that to me, that shouldn't we be focusing all of our attention on Jesus and not ourselves, I often think that that's resistance to doing our own work. It's a deflection. And for me, I think that's a tragic missed opportunity. And so I would encourage people to do the work of self-reflection, which is not navel gazing. It's not some kind of egotism run riot, right? It's a way of sweeping our side of the street and trying to become the highest expression of ourselves in the world. I don't think that's in opposition to the gospel, do you?
No, I don't. I agree with you completely. If you have been raised, you quoted Calvin to begin with. If you have been raised in modern day Calvinism, you may well, and I've heard people say this to me, why would I look inward when all I would find is my wretchedness? Mm-hmm. If that's what you have been taught and raised with, and that's how faithfulness looks to you, where would you begin to, dismantle that? Is that the right word?
I mean, can you imagine how miserable that must be?
No.
I mean, here's the thing. I'll say something that Reformed people will probably shut off your podcast right now when I say it, but I urge them to stay on, and hear some of my reasoning. I believe in the doctrine of original sin. I don't understand it, but that doesn't mean I don't believe it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, all right, I'll buy it. But I like this phrase more. Sorry, Augustine. I would say I believe in the doctrine of original vulnerability.
Mm.
Meaning that all of us arrive here as, I think about Wordsworth, who said that we all, something to the effect of, we all come riding trails of glory, right? That said, we're born into a broken world, and we're not here very long before we begin to pick up real and perceived messages about our value, about our worth, our lovableness, and those messages begin to leave scars and nicks that profoundly affect our way of being in the world from that moment forward. And for me, I think we have to explore with great self-compassion the effects of the world on us when we arrived. And again, I think so many of the more conservative expressions of Christianity ignore our original goodness, our original beauty. And I think to do that, it sort of, how would I say this? It mortgages our spirituality.
Mm.
The Buddhists would call shooting the second arrow, right? Which is we come with a wound and then we shoot another one into it. It's like we do something wrong or we feel something like we are something wrong, and then we beat the crap out of ourselves for it. That's the second arrow. The first one was bad enough. You know what I mean?
So you didn't choose to be born. You just ended up here.
Yeah,
but now it's your fault.
Yeah, in other words, you were not consulted. You were not consulted about the family you were born into, your skin color, your gender, your sexual orientation. None of these things, you were not consulted about any of them. And so, how do we make our way in the world? And I think part of the journey is understanding to my Reformed friends, maybe I would say this. How can you understand your profound need for grace if you have no self-knowledge? Right? It becomes a mere theological abstraction rather than an experienced reality. So again, I could speak at length about it, and I hope I have not put off people who I would hope would hang in there in the conversation. But I think it's a tragic overstatement that requires a correction of the excess in it.
Yeah, that resonates deeply. Thank you. How did you end up here?
Well, where
you have 8 minutes.
What location do you think I inhabit?
How did you journey to this space? Were you raised in a tradition or framework that spoke this way? Are you passing on the teachings of every one of your mentors, or have you, like so many of us, crashed and burned and had to pick up all the pieces?
Well, I think I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, went to Catholic schools for years.
Beautiful.
I'm not one of those kids who hates the Catholic Church. There was a lot about it I found incredibly beautiful and wonderful. The educators aside, I found the Mass to be profoundly affecting. I was involved in high school in an evangelical youth group, and I have a great debt of gratitude to them. They saved my life as a kid, growing up in a very, oh boy, troubled would be an understatement, a home with a drug addicted father who eventually died from his disease. I'll skip forward. I became an Episcopal priest. It was as close as I could get to being a Catholic priest. In other words, having a rich sacramental life. I became a novelist, a memoirist. I became a songwriter here in Nashville. I've had a wonderful portfolio kind of life. and then also became a psychotherapist. And so all of these different vocations were in service to the same goal, which was to help both myself and others enter into a deeper conversation with the mystery of God and the mystery of their own lives.
Mm.
And what a great calling. I mean, what a wonderful adventure that has been for me. I'd also add that I've been profoundly affected spiritually by my own recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. And so working a 12-step program has been a wonderful ancillary part of my spiritual journey. I self-identify as a Christian, but these other pools of wisdom have deeply helped me, as has, and I was going to be honest with your audience, I don't do this very often, but as has a decade-long study of Tibetan Buddhism. And I oftentimes refer to myself as a Buddhist enriched Christian.
Mm. I love that. I can resonate with a lot of that. I have been raised charismatic. I'm a kids pastor at a charismatic church who baptized all of his children Roman Catholic.
Hmm.
They're all in Catholic school, except that one of them has COVID. So right now they're all at home in my house. Surprise.
Yes, the COVID catechism, we call it.
That's right. It is indeed a sanctifying process.
They're all involved.
I laid on my bed in the middle of the day today, just sort of being like, yes, and perseverance produces character,
Like,
something like that. Sweet Jesus, help me.
Lady of Sorrows.
So, okay, how then have the 9 types of the Enneagram specifically been a catalyst then for you in this work of helping people discover God and themselves and the beauty, the original glory of it all?
But I think it's important to say at the outset that I don't have any. I'm I'm always talking people off the Enneagram ledge. It's like they get so enthusiastic about it to the point of it being a little delusional. Like we have found, the secret to decoding the mystery of the human person. It's a dramatic overstatement. It's a model. That's all it is. And as George Box, the great British statistician, once said, all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Mm.
And I just ascribe to that idea that, the Enneagram is wrong. How could it possibly, with any precision, accurately describe the fullness, the mystery of the human person? However, it's very useful, right? It's true enough. Right. And that's the case with everything from economics to, history. There are models of understanding, and we just have to hold them lightly, And so for me, I think that what it's done is it's given me a language, and a very useful one, for understanding the different ways that people see and move through the world. And are there only 9 types? I don't know. Here's what I do know. These 9 ways of seeing the world appear so often in the general population that we should pay attention to them, right? And they've helped me enormously in my own life. I've seen it help others in their marriages, in their work, in their self-understanding. And when used correctly, it's fantastic. It's a great little spiritual formation tool among many. In fact, I tell people all the time, never use the Enneagram in isolation. It should always be twinned with other, spiritual practices or, ways of seeing the world that can help you along your path.
Yeah, for sure. In my journey with the Enneagram and beyond, it's been like, yeah, the intersection of understanding bits and pieces of who I am and how I tend to operate and what kind of traumatic triggers contributed to this maladaptive and positive picture today, and then tying that into IFS or some kind of emotionally focused therapy or other bits and pieces and contemplative spiritual practices of my own. All that kind of stuff has been just transformative, powerfully transformative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth remembering that personality typing goes back to the Greeks, the early Greeks. I mean, it's not like this is a new sort of system. The early Greeks did it. The Buddhists have 300 personality types. Modern psychology of several schools of modern psychology have personality, use personality or character, ways of understanding the human person. This one to me seems like the most accessible, and to your point too, it reveals that we are a bundle of contradictions, right? We are both broken and beautiful, or as your Canadian listeners will appreciate, Bruce Coburn's line about we are both, we're angel beasts, we're a little bit of both, right? And it's much better to bring into conscious awareness that broken, or as Jung would say, the shadow aspect of who we are. The more you can bring into surface consciousness, the better off you are. The better off you are to understand those drives and motivations that live beyond the fence line of our awareness most of the time, so that you have more agency, you have more freedom to make different choices than you did before you were aware of those forces, which for many, many years have governed your life from the shadows.
Yes. Wow. That's exactly what has happened to me. I remember when folks first were kind of like, oh, Enneagram this. And I was like, oh, cool. I love these things. Let's do a quiz online. And no, hold on. Let's have a much more robust conversation. I began learning about it all. Would you walk us through the 9 types, how you label them and understand them?
Sure. All right. So what I'll do is I'll just very briefly, one sentence, describe the type, and then I'm going to maybe just give you a sentence about the unconscious motivation of that type. And why is this important? Because, you actually contain all 9 types. And if, there's only one that you tend to be dominant in, it describes you better than the other 8 types, right? And remember, these are low resolution pictures, right? And so again, you're not going to have some epiphany where it's like, oh my gosh, this is the whole of me. It's not. What It's not what you do, but why you do it that matters. It's why. It's what's motivating it underneath the surface line of the water line of consciousness, if you will. All right, here we go. Ones are called the improvers. Ethical, meticulous, detail-oriented, morally heroic. They are motivated by a need to be good and to perfect themselves, others, in the world. Okay. 2s are called the helpers, though I'm starting to call them the befrienders.
I like that.
Warm, caring, giving, supportive, emotionally attuned people. They're motivated by a need to be liked, really. A deep need to be appreciated and liked. All right. 3s are called the performers, success-oriented, image-conscious, wired for productivity. They're motivated by a need to succeed, to appear successful, and to avoid failure at all costs. 4s, the romantics, the finest number on the Enneagram, I might add. Creative, sensitive, moody, disproportionately represented in the creative arts. They're motivated, I believe, by a need to belong, to heal this broken perception that they have been relegated to the aisle of misfit toys, and they need to find this missing piece in their essential makeup that disqualifies them from belonging. So 5's the investigator, analytical, detached, very private. Often people experience them as aloof or emotionally unavailable. They're motivated by a need to gain knowledge, to conserve energy, and to attain self-sufficiency. 6's the loyalists, sometimes called the devil's advocates, committed, practical, witty. They're worst-case scenario thinkers who are motivated by fear and the need for security, safety, and support. 7's the enthusiasts, fun, spontaneous, adventurous. They're motivated by a need to avoid psychological and emotional distress. 8's the challenger, second best number on the Enneagram, I might add. Commanding, intense, confrontational. My mother, who is an 8, likes to say, 8s could start an argument in an empty house. They're motivated by a need to assert strength and power over the environment and others to really mask vulnerability, right? 9s are called the peacemakers. They're oftentimes called the sweethearts of the Enneagram, pleasant, laid back, accommodating, go with the flow, don't rock the boat. They're motivated by a need to maintain inner and external peace, to avoid relational disconnection, and markedly, really to avoid conflict. You're welcome.
Yeah, that's so clearly you're like a 4 with a soft spot for 8s.
I definitely do, in part because 4s and 8s, I think, are two of the most misunderstood numbers on the Enneagram.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm married to an 8, and the Enneagram has been really helpful. I mean, let me put it this way. She wants nothing to do with the Enneagram. She feels like she doesn't want to be controlled or manipulated, and it's another system that the world has devised to cause her harm. So,
well, that sounds like a perfect 8. That's an 8 description right there. And by the way, when I say numbers on the Enneagram, of course, I'm being facetious, because there's all these numbers are beautiful when they're self-aware and working on themselves. I just was,
Yes,
doing my thing here.
yes, all the 2s were like, oh, but we feel a little bit hurt, but we also like that he's kind of funny and friendly.
Yes.
So here's what's happened in the last year for me. In COVID, with lockdowns and all this kind of uncertainty, obviously globally, and all the bits and pieces that go into the last 12 months of the human experience on this planet, I feel like I have fallen really hard onto my default coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
I am a pretty self-aware person. I've put a lot of effort into that. I've got robust practices. COVID slapped everything silly. My wife, the same. For her, she has had a overwhelming an exported need upon the rest of us to have all the ducks in a row, to sort out all the things, to know what's happening, to know the plan, the schedule, how we're responding, and so on. I just feel like an emotional mess. I feel sad and happy. I feel desperately in need of my friendships, and they've all been taken away, of course. And at some times, it's felt like we are so different to one another. Our coping mechanisms are so poles apart. How can we possibly survive? How can which is to say, how can our marriage survive COVID any longer? Now, before you respond, I would say that when we are flowing better, 2s and 8s have a real wonderful kind of co-inherence in terms of compassion and advocacy for those around us. So mostly that's where we live. But when we don't live there, it's like, how on earth have we gotten through 15 years of this insanity? I'd love to hear your thoughts on my marriage, but also just how stress affects the types, and what are people doing? I mean, we can spend the rest of the show on this. How are we surviving, and what does it look like, and what would you encourage us to do or to consider?
I would say that one of the maybe words of encouragement I would have for your wife is learn the Enneagram, because it would make your life a lot easier in the house during COVID. You would begin to realize that the human personality is adaptive, meaning that, throughout the course of the day, it has to be dynamic to meet different situations, right? As I mentioned earlier, you contain all 9 types. I mean, I draw energy from, and habits from all these 9 types. There's just one that I tend to default to, right? That I click into more often than the others. I think what it's given, for example, to my wife, who's a 9, I'm a 4, it completely revolutionized our marriage. I thought I knew my wife after 20 years of marriage, and only to discover with using the Enneagram that I did not understand her inner architecture. And once I did, it changed everything. We suddenly had a vernacular, a language around which we could talk. Things were no longer as personal, you know. And we began to understand what we were like when we are under stress, and we start to double down in predictable and habitual patterns of thinking, acting, and feeling, which are not in service to us any longer. You know, and tangentially, Carl Jung is a hero to me. Jung once said that which helps you in the morning of life to survive in the afternoon of life will kill you. That's a bastardization of the actual quote, but that's the idea. Which is so true. Your personality, when you're a little kid, helped you get your needs met. It helped you figure out how to navigate the world of relationships. It is in many ways a response to trauma and the desire to avoid that trauma again, right? And so, when you begin to realize these things about each other, and that we tend to double down when things get tough, you can talk, you have empathy, it arouses compassion, understanding, forbearance, long suffering. I mean, goodness gracious, if you're a Christian, why wouldn't you want those things, right? Those characteristic features of a healthy human, an evolved human. I mean, sounds like another good reason to, dip your feet into a system like the Enneagram, right? And I would say too that for twos, but for every type, that I was on another interview this morning with it. I think maybe the guy was from Great Britain, and I had to tell him that there's a new position in the British government in the UK that is the Minister of Loneliness. It's a remarkable thing that a government would recognize that one of the great crises of our age is loneliness, and I think the Enneagram is a great tool for mitigating loneliness. Everybody wants to be seen and understood. And this is what the gift of the Enneagram is. And to your point, what a balm in a season of crisis, right? And we need as much of these healing ointments in our lives now as we can possibly get our hands on. And I guess I would say that maybe one of my experiences in this season has been loneliness. And I think it has been that's been part of the larger global trauma of this thing, is this feeling of isolation. It's nice to be understood.
Seriously. Can you walk us through each of the 9 types under stress?
Well, I mean, I think you've really kind of said it. If I were just going to put it succinctly, without maybe necessarily dragging through all the types, because it would take us some time. And also because I could describe to you what these types are like under stress. But remember that when we talk about personality styles, we are talking about probabilities, not predictive behavior. In other words, it is probable that when you are under stress as a 2, you will act this way, but it is not predetermined, right? People surprise us all the time, right? That's why we always say about each other from time to time, we say, boy, Ian's just not himself today. Right? I'm not acting in ways that are within the bandwidth of my probabilities, anyhow, like a 1 may double down, become judgmental and critical, maybe too controlling, starting to become overly concerned with ordering the disordered, repairing broken systems, beginning to believe that there are 2 ways to do things, their way and the wrong way. 2s under stress, you all can get aggressive. The Enneagram teaches that when 2s are under stress, they go to the low side of 8. They start to look like unhealthy 8s. You could go into like this profound helping mode. And if any number on the Enneagram is lonely right now, it's 2s. You're the most interpersonal, relationships, oriented number on the Enneagram. You go to bed in the morning, getting up in the morning, thinking about relationships. You go to bed at night thinking about relationships. And when you're in isolation, not good. You can get aggressive. you can become very frustrated. Your emotionality might increase. Um, and you might begin to find yourself picking up the phone or Zooming more often than not, and just to be able to make sure that your connections with others are secure. Mm. Uh, I could go through all these types. Would you like me to do it?
Yeah, go through the types, because I know for some folks, again, who are still coming into the tool, especially now in terms of COVID stress, it's helpful to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I can identify myself in some of that.
So again, for threes, threes are probably doing better than a lot of types, because they're very adaptable. They're very good in a crisis situation, like a few other numbers are. And but their tendency would be to go to the begin to look like an unhealthy 9, where they will become a little lost, a little depressed, feeling directionless sometimes, watching too much Netflix, not getting dressed for the day, not caring for their appearance as much as they used to. That's typical for threes. Or they're just going to double down on work. You know what I mean? Like they're just going to go into hyperdrive, and will start to demand a lot of people from work, more than what they're capable of giving at this point, right?
We'll take a quick break to thank my patrons. Thank you so much to everybody who supports the show monthly, annually. You guys make this possible. You keep me encouraged. And I love the conversations and comments that we have on the private, secret, patron-only content, like the B-side, where we unpack each episode in greater depth, me and my friends. A huge shout out to Ming, who is my latest patron. Thank you so much, Ming. Blessed to have you. Friends, if you would like to support the show, if you'd like to have more behind-the-scenes access and listen to the B-sides each week, then go to patreon.com/Jonathan Puddle. You can become a supporter for as little as $3 a month or $30 a year, and I would be really glad to have you. Thanks so much. Back to the show.
Fours, I don't know. I'm a 4. I'm a particular kind of 4, but the typical 4 is probably doing okay. In COVID, I mean, I'm very sorry for the tragic dimensions of it, but for a lot of COVID, I've been very happy to be home. I'm not an introvert per se, but I do very much enjoy time alone for reading, reflection, writing, for my sort of creative output. I only have so much energy for other people. That said, I can really kind of go to the low side of 2, as what the Enneagram teaches. We will do when we're not great. I can become clingy. I can become sort of needy. I could become resentful of other people for not appreciating me enough, for all the things that I do for them, which is not inconsiderable. And so, all to say, what the Enneagram does, you see, is it predicts what you might probably be like under stress, right? It's not going to get the whole of it, and again, people surprise us, but I could say with probability, my friend Anthony, who's sitting here, my producer, who is also a 4, he's probably responding this way, right? But that prediction is helpful in my relationship with him. 5s, they probably more than any other type are doing okay in COVID. I was laughing the other day. I work with a lot of corporate, in the corporate space a lot. And in fact, more than anywhere else. And a guy who's a coder at a company recently said to his boss, "Do I have to come back to the office when COVID's over?" And I just said, "Now that's predictable." 5s could be spending a lot of time on the internet right now, gathering tons of information. They love their autonomy is really important to them. They love to work from home or in a coffee shop doing their own thing. I would say that I think that, however, 5s could go to the low side of 7 under stress and begin to become a little manic, a little disjointed. Their thinking can become disorganized, right? Unusually disorganized for them. And their way of communicating could become what we call logoretic, or like word salad, right? things are just coming out in this sort of a discombobulated way. Um, the sixes, the loyalists, oh, good, poor things, these anxiety-ridden people, these chronic worriers during an age of COVID. Oh my gosh, very uncomfortable, the sixes that I know right now. They all have to really discipline themselves not to watch Wolf Blitzer in that damn situation room, where everything is cause for panic. These are worst case scenario thinkers, and when they're not doing well, they'll go to the low side of three. They'll start to be involved in all kinds of pointless busyness, and trying to cope with anxiety, trying to cope with preparedness, and being very, very worried about the state of the world and how it might affect them. They also, by the way, might be too tempted to look to strong authoritarian leaders and experts to tell them what to do in order to remain safe. And so they have to be careful of groupthink, and joining forces with other like-minded sixes who are looking for the same thing. Sevens, sevens have reframed COVID as something positive. They have all this wonderful, if sixes at their worst cope with fear through pessimism, sevens cope with it through optimism.
You wouldn't believe how many times I could repaint my house in 6 months.
Exactly. Right. Now, the joy of the seven, though, of course, is they bring all this energy of optimism into spaces, and we need it. Right. I mean, we need that. And we need also the caution, the cautiousness, and the preparedness of the six, in its healthiest expression, right? Not when it becomes neurotic. So sevens under stress will start to, go to the low side of one. They can become morally superior. They'll start. My son is a seven. I remember one time he was away at boarding school, and he said to me, I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "I've been organizing my sock drawer, and I'm tired of all the kids on my floor who smoke pot and aren't doing their homework." And I'm like, "Is it exam time?" He's a kid that sevens, when they're under stress, they can become kind of rigid, critical, judgmental, and so my son, because he knows the Enneagram now, is able to exercise self-awareness and realize that when he goes to that zone, right? Eights, well, when things get tough, the tough get going. They can really power up to meet challenges. You really want an eight around in crisis. Eights are fantastic. By the way, you also want fives. I mean, I haven't gone through all these types, with the gifts they bring, right? But a five brings this cool, dispassionate clarity and objectivity, like, that numbers like twos really need, right? Who are far more emotional than a five is, and can get lost in those emotions and swept up in the vortex of them. The eights, they have to be careful withdrawing. They can go into this low side of five space where they kind of go into isolation, which is very unusual for them. They're 3, 7s, and 8s are the three most aggressive numbers on the Enneagram. And so those 8s will sort of pause and pull back and start to look like an unhealthy 5. They can withdraw, isolate, start to do a lot of planning and thinking about what they're going to do next, among other things. And 9s start to look like unhealthy 6s and stress. They start to become more anxious, worst case scenario thinkers, a little paranoid, like some unhealthy 6s will do. The world feels like it's against them, working against their efforts. And again, among other things, I could go into great detail, but I'm just giving you a little bit of a flavor of where each type might or probably might go in stress. But I would say that the first line is they're going to double down in they're just common patterns. They're unhealthy patterns. Once they have exhausted all of those things and they're no longer working, then they're going to begin to act the way I'm describing. They're going to move around the Enneagram to these other types, right? And try to draw resources from them. Of course, they might get something good, but with an absence of self-awareness, this redoubling of the effort just spirals into something unhealthy and not good.
Yeah, I really appreciate that layering up that you described, because I have a lot of 3 tendencies and a lot of 7 tendencies as well. I definitely most keenly identify as a 2. But I can watch as I kind of as the wheels come further and further off. And I'm like, okay, so I've spoken to everybody that I can speak to, and my wife is frustrated with my codependent tendencies. So, okay, so relationships are not going to solve the problem. Uh, Accomplishments, excellent. Let me be really helpful to the whole world and sort out a whole bunch of stuff and get that next book draft done and do all these things. And oh, I didn't get that many likes on this post, so now I'm frustrated, and now I'm really offended that all this whole day my children haven't been doing the schoolwork they were meant to be doing while I was ignoring them.
Right. Right. Yeah. And then once you get that book done and you succeed at your podcast and you accomplish all these wonderful things, then finally people will like you.
So I said to my friend today on the phone, not long before this call, when I was kind of spinning out because we're a week into 4 weeks of isolation due to contracting COVID. And I said, everything in my life is working, and I'm very frustrated and lonely still.
But the thing that twos have to work on is learning how to be in solitude.
Yeah.
Because you are so relationship oriented. I mean, that's your drug of choice, is relationships. And really and another drug of choice is appreciation and being liked, right? And when your supply is cut off, right, you start to Jones, you start to have withdrawal. And so being in solitude where you're actually having to get in touch with your own needs and your own desires and your own wants, rather than exclusively focusing on the desires, the wants, and the needs of others, is both torturous and necessary, right, to become a whole person.
Absolutely.
So I have a spiritual director. His name is Brother Curtis. I haven't seen him in a long time, but he's an Episcopal monk in Cambridge, Mass. And one time he got mad at me whining about my addicted self and all my problems, blah, blah, blah. And he got his face right up into the screen of my computer. And he's wearing a cowl. He's a monk, right? And he says to me, Ian, this is your life. These are the cards. What's the invitation? And I remember being thrown back on my heels by the final question. What he was saying is that in every situation, every crisis, there is a divine invitation to something new. And so in this moment, I think we have to ask ourselves in these crises moments, one of many questions I love. 2 questions. How's this? One is, what is God's will for my life in this situation over which I have no control? Right? It's always a good question to journal on. Another one is, what does love require of me right now? What does love require of me right now? It's probably a good question, even when when you're not in crisis, to ask several times a day. What does love require of me right now? These are invitations, right? In these times of crises, for every type, for all people.
I would love to double click on those questions a little more. What is God's purpose for me in this situation that I cannot control?
Yes.
Without, I like the way you put that, because we can obviously, without the parameter, we can very quickly spin out what is God's purpose of me in my life, and how am I, oh my gosh, I've been off track for the last 5 years, and suddenly you're spiraling.
Don't flatter yourself. Nobody's been off track for 5 years, for crying out loud. I don't know what it is about Christians, It's sort of like this, I don't know. It's like this kind of aversion to self-compassion. This is what I've learned from the Buddhists. It's like, this is like some sort of neurotic obsession with your brokenness. It's like, please, people, don't flatter yourself. You're not nearly as bad as you think you are, right? And you are right. I think that one of the great illusions that human beings tend to live under is that they believe they are much more in control of life than they actually are. We have far less control. far less control than we'd like to think.
Mm.
That's an illusion. And actually, when you begin to accept powerlessness becomes ultimate power. You know, it's a paradox in the spiritual life.
But it's a very cruciform thing to say, really, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Again, not to go to too hackneyed a text, but Philippians 2 would be a great example of this, right? The emptying of the I, the ego, the ability to say, to die to oneself, right? And it's just when we talk about that, it means to die to this ego that is in constant service to its own aggrandizement, right? Its own inflation, and it's misery when we live there. When God says, when Paul says, for I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, and he talks about being crucified with Christ. I mean, for crying out loud, it sounds so terrible. It's like God wants to kill you. And the answer is he does. But the you that he wants to kill is this false self, this ego,
Yes.
that makes us miserable and that wants to be in control, which actually makes us very hard to live with, and it leads to things like wars. Or just misery in your little microcosm of a life every day.
I've been doing this course in the Gospel of John with Paul Young and Brad Jurasek and Father John Baer, a bunch of these guys and women, Cherith Nordling, Julie Canlis. And there's been a lot of discussion recently on this exact piece, this I no longer live, but Christ lives in me, and around this idea of the ego, the false self, the movement from I, the self-actualization, the ego existence, the title of God as I am, the only one who gets to exist in and of himself, to the movement to me. If Christ lives in me, that makes me, I'm now the object of someone's affection. Mm-hmm. I is like self-existent, but me is observed and loved. And there's nothing in me that has to die. It's the I that has to die. I know that may sound like splitting hairs if you don't get it, but for those who are journeying.
Yeah. Well, anybody who wants to really understand that, really, they have to go to Merton's New Seeds of Contemplation and actually read chapter 5. I actually even know the chapter. I remember where I was when I read it. And I remember that it was like so powerful an epiphany that really everything from that day on was different for me. And this is where he talks about the true and the false self, the I, and it in its worst expression. And so I'd encourage your listeners, just go to chapter 5 of New Seeds of Contemplation and read away, because that's really where, Merton really he speaks with such surgical accuracy, describing this condition and the possibilities of living into a true self, which, by the way, is a very misleading term or not very well understood, because you never arrive at a true self. The human being is fundamentally a process. It's not a static thing. We are daily a process in continual change, with second to second. I mean, technically speaking, when you walk into I don't know how many hours you've been away from your wife, but the next time you see her, you will be a stranger to her, actually, because she has not spent the last 2 hours with you, and you haven't changed since she last saw you.
I mean, she feels like a stranger to me.
Well, again, we are speaking in very esoteric terms, but it has great practical import too. It's not just abstract, intellectually fascinating ideas. This has day-to-day import.
Yeah, absolutely so. Absolutely so. Ian, would you give us any some of your thoughts on what some of the things that you have pulled in from the Tibetan Buddhism that have been so life-giving or anchoring for you?
Yeah, and again, to reassure your audience if they're anxious about this, and unfortunately, so much of what characterizes many Christian lives is anxiety, which feeds their lust for certitude.
Bingo.
And so, the Buddhists have illuminated dimensions of the gospel that I would not have ever understood apart from their insight. So this is why I just say, I definitely self-identify as a Christian. I don't think you can be a Christian Buddhist. There are too many inconsistencies between the two views of the world. But there's so much we can import from their, like, for example, the Buddhist understanding of suffering. The four noble truths, the first one is that life is suffering, right? It's that, but when they translate suffering, the word dukkha actually means, to use Ethan Nichtern's translation of it, would be the feeling of not at home. And all of us in every given moment feel not at home. That's a very Christian idea. I've never heard it explained as well. Maybe the only word that would come close is C.S. Lewis's translation of the German word Sehnsucht, right? Which is this feeling of inconsolable longing for a far off country. And so it's this feeling of not at home. You feel anxious, you feel a little perturbed about your financial, in every given moment, there's something that is arousing this feeling of not at home. What a beautiful concept that I've learned about what it means to live in the world, right? None of us ever feel at home. That's a great way to awaken compassion in you, doesn't it? For yourself and for others, Let me give you another example, and I rarely speak about this, and hopefully your podcast is not gigantic and I won't be labeled a heretic and thrown out of every single, but how do we make sense of the idea that God is everywhere when most people have this very dualistic view, like for example, how I say this, Protestants tend to think that we're here and God is far away, and periodically he shows up here, like Jesus, or the canon, whatever, or you know what I mean. It's like, totally. But then he takes off again, and we live in this broken world that is devoid of God's presence. Of course, now the Catholic worldview would be very different. It would be that we live in a world brimming with grace. They have really a sacramental imagination. Really, the world is filled with God, so filled with God that we can't see it, right? And so the Buddhists help me understand how God is present to us, and how it is that we cannot flee from his spirit, her spirit, however you want to sort of wrestle with that term. Here's what I learned from the Buddhists. I think that God could be understood less as a person than as a field. That God is an environment. That when Paul says we live, move, and have our being, right? In God, it's like he meant it. Like we are in God right now as you and I speak, right? Every atom is charged with God's presence. That's not pantheism, right? It's this knowledge that we are awash in this thrumming presence of the Spirit that undergirds everything, right? And when I talk about God as a field through which we move, what I mean is that it's an intelligent, personal, and loving field, right? So I'm not saying that it's devoid of intelligence. I believe it's intelligent, it's personal, it's loving. The Buddhists taught me that, right? I imported that idea into my Christian worldview, and it illuminated a dimension of the gospel I would not have seen otherwise. Nobody speaks better. No one defines compassion better than the Buddhists. And here's the last thing I'd say of many things I could say. Now, again, coming at it from a Tibetan tradition, Buddhism is a practice-based religion versus Christianity, which is a belief-based religion. So actually, let me rephrase that. Buddhism is technically not a religion. I would more describe it as a philosophy. There's no deity in Buddhism, which is one of the things that most people don't understand, and that's why they get all spooked. It's really, in many ways, it's a science of the mind. But but it's practice-based. It's like, it doesn't say just believe this and it makes you a Buddhist, right? It says do this right? And the Buddha himself said, and by the way, don't believe what I say, practice it. And you'll know if it's true, if it works. I love that about the Buddha, right? And so, it's about right livelihood. It's about right speech. It's about right thinking. It's, and so they would call that the Eightfold Path, right? And so, again, I love the fact that it's a practice-based religion, and it helps me not just be a person who understands right theology. It's not that it's not important. It's just not helpful if it's exclusive.
Well, and we can see, I think, the damage of that kind of Christianity where we're like, well, I'm justified by my beliefs.
Right.
And now my practice is I don't have to care for my neighbor. I don't have to care for the poor. And I'm allowed to support exploitative world systems because my beliefs are in the right place and I get to go to heaven when I die.
That's a distortion, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
But these are a few of the things that I've learned. And by the way, the other one would be the importance of a regular meditation practice, which I try to employ on a daily basis. And by the way, is twins beautifully with my Enneagram work, because the Enneagram is not merely descriptive, it's prescriptive. It's a journey, it's a work. It requires energy and thought, and also a mind that is, practiced in attention. And the only way to really practice attention is, the best way to strengthen the attentional muscle in my mind is a regular centering prayer, if you want to call it that practice, or just a basic sitting practice that you could learn from the Buddhists, which is not to assuage the fears of many who may be listening. That is not discontinuous with the gospel. It's not. And so again, I put it out there. People can hopefully ponder it.
I love it. People who are listening who have read my book will be like, whoa, Ian is like, Jonathan clearly must have listened to this earlier and built his life upon these practices, and that now contextualizes everything Jonathan wrote in his book. Let's just say that's how it happened. I'm very, very thankful, and I resonate so deeply with all these aspects. Ian, would you pray for us?
Yeah, sure. I've never had a podcaster ask me to do that, but if it's okay, I'm going to read maybe pray the long form of Reinhold Niebuhr's The Serenity Prayer, which has been so important to me in my journey of recovery and just becoming, I hope, a better human being. So, God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ian. I love that. That was just so life-giving and affirming and clarifying for me. If you enjoyed all this with Ian, make sure to go check out Ian's website and podcast and order his book. You'll find him at Ian Morgan Cron and at Typology Podcast. You should definitely be listening to his show. It's really, really great. His book, of course, The Road Back to You, an Enneagram Journey of Self-Discovery. Click the show notes to find links to everything you need, including the transcript of this podcast. Friends, last week I had Kurt Willems on the show. I got some great feedback in from Matt. Matt writes, dude, that Kurt Willems podcast was fantastic. Off the charts, helpful, uplifting, and practical. I had the pleasure of meeting Kurt way back, and thank you for that podcast. So thank you, Matt. That was wonderful. Also, Craig wrote in, the podcast with Kurt Willems is awesome. Thanks for that. I do love your feedback, friends, or your comments on episodes and private messages. I gotta say, I prefer private messages. I know a lot of people are like, I'm not in my DMs. I guess that's for famous people, but I love the private messages. So send me the DMs. Let me know what you're thinking of the show. Thank you very much. If you want to go back and listen to Kurt Willems, there's also a really great B-side on that I recorded with my friend Jacob, who is a pastor and deep thinker, lives in North Carolina. We unpacked lots of things around suffering and dark nights of the soul and when God feels absent. That was on the show last week. Friends, lots of exciting things coming up in the next few weeks. Grace and peace to you. Hope to hear from you soon.